Hey, Nick.
And coming and coming and coming.
You have a chair?
This panel brings together some of the most intelligent, articulate people that are trying to get to the bottom of what's going on in the world today. I wouldn't say we're trying to get to the truth, but I can't use that word because that is a pejorative term now. I've been so successful at transforming a word like truth. Oh, you're
You gotta talk louder.
Very loudly.
Well, let's try to keep it down.
There's no AC. Okay, let's go.
Across the spectrum, there is an accepted narrative that these things that keep happening, 9/11, ISIS, are a failure. They keep telling us. Now, this was the same narrative with 9/11. It's the same narrative with ISIS. Failure of U.S. policy. Curiously, there's never any reprimands or any firings for any of these failures. Usually when you have failures on the level of this, somebody loses their job. Somebody gets identified as the reason for this failure, but we don't have that here. Something else is happening. Being accused of failing is a lot better than being accused of planning and executing acts of terrorism and mass murder. So failure narrative seems to be the one that's been, accepted throughout the spectrum, even in the left. People in the left will argue with you. Oh, come on, U.S. government couldn't be that evil, or elements in the U.S. government. It's not the U.S. government. It's not even the CIA. It's all been privatized. Right? We don't even know who these people who are effectuating this stuff are. Right? We have some names. We have some clues. We know the structural system of privatization of the intelligence agencies, the privatizations of the military. We know how this is going. Right? And now, in the Middle East, our policy of killing off the last remaining secular governments, right, which to nobody's surprise are quickly replaced by radical Islamic governments. It's also being called a failure. But it's not like the State Department doesn't know that when we oust a secular Middle East dictator, usually a former puppet of ours, a radical Islamist government is quickly waiting to fill in the void. This is, it's not like the State Department goes, oops, we had no idea that when we killed off our former puppet, and left a vacuum, that a bloodthirsty medieval fundamentalist terrorist network would fill the void. Imagine that. We had no idea. We've known this since Iran. When we got rid of when the Shah was, got rid of by an Islamic uprising. Mossadegh, and then the Shah of Iran replaced by a brutal Islamic, not brutal, not so
We have to discuss the brutal.
hardline Islamic. Yeah. No, they execute gay people. That's brutal. Ayatollah Khomeini. And I remember when I was in high school at the time, and in high schools and junior high schools across America, you know what they were all wearing? T-shirts that said "Fuck Iran." And you know what? We were all excited about that. You know why? Because prior to that period, 1970s, you wore a T-shirt saying "Fuck the police" or "Fuck this" or "Fuck that." You get thrown out of school. Now it was sanctioned by the government. You could now wear a T-shirt, and children were used in this propaganda campaign. Because I think this is a concerted effort. If everyone across the nation has got the same T-shirt, right? This is a plan, right? Now, why would U.S. policy be to kill the last remaining secular, non-radical, stable leaders in the Middle East? Why would they do this? I mean, in Libya, why get rid of Gaddafi? Women had rights. They held office. They flew planes. He was champion of women's rights, not often found in northern African Islamic, largely countries. Right? UN had ranked them #1 in the Human Development Index. Right? The country was stable. It was not a radical Islamic government. Okay, maybe the guy had a bad hair day. Or a permanent had bad hair. Had bad hair life. But he was no threat to our fatherland. Oh, did I say fatherland? I meant homeland. And now we replaced Gaddafi with this Islamic bloodbath. Right? So it's your You choose, right? And over in Syria, Assad seems like a rational player. He was an optometrist, calm, measured, well-spoken. They don't want you to ever listen to an interview with him, because when you do, you come away saying, "Oh, the guy seems pretty mild, pretty mild-mannered." We're told that he's a murderous dictator, right? But we don't see any evidence of it. And the evidence that they do say that he released chemical weapons on his own people, well, the world's leading United Nations weapons inspector, Carla Del Ponte, said quite the opposite, that it was our proxy, the United States proxy force. And of course it makes sense. He's not going to shoot someone. Nobody would release chemical weapons just at the time when Obama said, well, if you release chemical weapons, we're going to destroy you and annihilate you. You wouldn't believe that. Nobody would do that. He's not insane. He's a rational actor.
And Ted Postal, too. Ted Postal at MIT.
Okay. He's got a rather stunning wife, British-born, possibly the most articulate first lady in the world today. Certainly the most attractive. She's stunning. There's probably a bit of jealousy, considering she outshines most of the other Western. But the bottom line is, Assad has the support of his people. He is a stable, rational leader in a country which is famous for having a vast array of different ethnic and religious peoples all living together in harmony. Right? Well, not anymore, because the U.S. wants to replace this with this. Sorry. I'll just fill in. Allah Akbar as they slice the heads in, so you get the picture. All right, so I just do some more here. Now it's like doesn't seem to be changing.
I think you might have to play it.
You got your Allah Akbars. Okay, you got your film Allah Akbars. Now the question is, why? Why after we spent 14 years claiming that our biggest enemy was radical Islamic terrorism, right? And we did, after all, spend the entire wealth of the United States government, which had the largest surplus of money when we started this venture, right? This profitable venture for the arms industry. And now we have the largest deficits. Actually, we didn't spend the entire wealth of this nation to fight ISIS. We transferred that money from the people, you, to the military industry. So it wasn't really spent, it was just taken, stolen. Now, none of these so-called failures makes any sense, until one abandons the failure narrative and sees these events from the perspective of those who have the most to gain. And then it becomes really clear. These are not failures. This is the intended policy. The real policymakers in the United States of America, and who are they? These ones. Wall Street oligarchs, military-industrial complex, state of Israel. This is who controls the foreign policy of America. And the domestic policy. I mean, the foreign policy has to be paid for, and that's done by the domestic policy, taxation. And they're taking the money from us, taking it from our people. So this policy of making sure that radical Islam expands as fast as possible to as many countries as possible is not a failure. Everything is going as planned. That is until the plan goes awry, like it always does, with these imbeciles in the CIA, the State Department think they know how to do these cataclysmic changes, right? They never seem to get it right. It doesn't matter. Because each time they get it wrong, they just say, well, we're going to have to take some more money from you to get it right next time. And we're going to need more powers, more invasive powers, to get it right next time. And we're going to have to get rid of some more of those nasty little rights that you used to have in order to get it right next time. And if we screw up again, we're going to just take more money, more rights, and that's how it works. That's the cycle we're caught in, right? More hardware at airports. Take off your shoes, jump through this suit. We got to scan your genitals now. Yeah, genital scanning for everybody. Nice. So that we can create this perfect society where there's no crime, no terrorism, everybody's safe. Right? Oh, okay, so how much is it going to cost me for that? This promise of well, it's going to cost you. Step inside this little box, prison, safe in there, Nothing did happen to you. And give us all your money and we'll watch over you 24 hours a day. I mean, that's the ultimate place we're heading to. Okay, so I don't want to live in a prison state, I'm sorry. That's not the way, that's not the country I grew up in, that's not the kind of place we live. So, in order to make sense of all this mess, we have to ask the question, who benefits from U.S. wars in the Middle East? Who benefits from ISIS? Right? Well, first group that comes to mind is these guys. Yeah, there's a lot more of them, you know, but you get the idea. The problem in this country is that the Supreme Court has ruled that there's no limits to the amount of money that a billionaire or an entity or a corporation can give to a scumbag, politician. You know, no limits. And the problem is that the defense industry, which only represents about 5 to 7% of our GDP, I say it's a little bit more, because there's a lot of money we don't think about, but it is able to have this disproportionate grip on our society, through its disproportionate grip on our elected leaders, because of several factors. One of them is their aggressive lobbying. And the other factors are psychological factors that play into this, the basic psychology of these politicians. They don't want to appear to be, not to be patriotic or to be weak on terror. In the passive sphere of being weak on communism, that was being weak on terrorism. But we'll talk more about the disproportionate nature of our government, of our society. Life out of balance. The mainstream media, they also benefit. Now, can any of you tell me why I included this in this slide for the mainstream media, the logo for the CIA and the State Department? Who can tell me why I included them with the mainstream?
Operation Model.
Because it's the state corporate.
Because that's right.
That's right.
Because these guys get their information from the State Department. You think that CNN doesn't have an embedded reporter in ISIS, so we get the next best thing, barbers, the jowled, embedded official spokeswoman of the Pentagon, never questioning everything the government tells her to say. CNN simply tells us what the CIA and the Pentagon and the State Department tells them to tell us. There's no reporting, there's no questioning of the story. How many times have you heard when the CIA says, "Oh, we got Bin Laden and we just threw his body in the ocean"? When did Anderson Cooper say, "That sounds fishy"? Never. They just reported as for face value. Sorry, we know there's a little thing called history, and we know that they just lie. They lie. CIA. If they're not questioning every single thing you get from the CIA, then you're not a news agency. You're a PR firm for the State Department.
Including use of the word mainstream.
Yeah.
It's not mainstream, it's corporate.
Well, CNN is not a news organization. Barbara Stark is not a journalist. Turn them off. And if you have any loved ones who watch it, turn them off. Get them to turn it off. It's a disgrace. Waste your time. Who else benefits? The Jews. Evil Jews, you know. Don't worry about it. I love Jews. They're my favorite people. But Jews. Right? Israel. Right? I know in my last panel on political correctness, I said that you cannot use the term Jew. You must use the term Zionist or Israel. And if you use the J word, you're in violation. However, there are...
You're just wrong.
I understand.
Speakers please.
The money that's coming to go to U.S. politicians is not coming from Israel. It's coming from American
Zionist.
Zionist.
How about we just say Netanyahu?
No, it's not
Your junior
I said it
partner.
specifically to be provocative. If you look at the Vietnam plan, it's the plan that Israel has, and it's the same plan that the United States has. Balkanize existing states along religious and ethnic lines. And curiously, that's the exact same policy of the United States, to balkanize the world.
So what ethnic group are you?
I'm a mutt. French is
Okay, because
supposedly there's a Jew in
Europeans
there.
are the ruling classes, WASPs.
No, I'm not lost. I was more Catholic. Let's get back to ISIS. ISIS controlled areas, by the way, appear to be along the same lines as we want to split these up. The Kurds in the north and the Sunni in the middle and the Shiite. And so that's pretty convenient. Thanks, ISIS. If ISIS isn't an organization created entirely by U.S. intelligence establishment and their partners, it sure does get this year's award for looking exactly like that. Who else benefits from ISIS? Republican politicians. These slimy little rats, because of their careers, are based entirely on promoting fear, selling us out to their masters in Wall Street, the evil industrial complex in the Israeli government. And please don't tell me that they're not selling us out to the Israeli lobby. It doesn't control Republicans. They do. Right? So we're going to talk about truth, not about fiction here. Let's be fair. Let's not leave out Democrats. They're equally as slimy as Republicans. You know, they're all in on it. Right? Who else benefits from ISIS? There's a special connection between the previous beneficiaries. Could we please have someone
Move
quiet?
on to the panel.
Yes, please. Panelists, please.
How the
No,
lawyer.
please, I apologize.
AIPAC was founded by the American Jewish Committee and by Hasbara and by all the leading Jewish organizations.
Okay, anyone who's ever watched a Republican presidential primary debate can tell you that the candidates literally compete with each other to convince the Israeli lobby that each one will be more eagerly willing to serve their needs. That's how it works. Okay.
No interrupt.
I don't like it.
Get out, leave.
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 Can we please?
We're not here to hear you.
So go out. Go out. Go
I don't
out.
like it.
Stop interrupting.
I'll wait.
Stop interrupting. Enough is enough.
I'll wait.
Can I ask a question?
No. Let him speak. Let him speak. Go ahead. Let him speak. Let him finish.
Okay, I'll wait.
Get out.
Who suffers under Iraq? Well, I just want you to know where you okay. Who pays the price? Well, the Islamic population, right? Well, let's skip over this next one. Certainly not Israel. No ISIS attacks on Israel. Why? You know, you want to know something? I'm making the point that Saudi Arabia and Israel are actually supporting ISIS. So in order to do that, I have to talk about Israel. I'm sorry that you can't use the I, J, and Z words, but I have to do it in order to tell this story. Okay. Now, why does the American family suffer? Because their money's going to these guys. Remember them? Yeah. Right. Who else suffers under ISIS? Let's not forget the American kids we send over there and pay and pay and pay, sometimes the ultimate price with their life. And so a lot of people are paying a very heavy price for either our failure, right, or for the actual U.S. policy. But either way, we're paying the price. You better believe it. And today, we're going to try to get to the bottom of it. We're going to name names. We're going to use words that may be difficult for some people who are stuck in the politically correct paradigms of the cleansing of ideas or the cleansing of language. I don't do that. Right? So you're not going to get a cleansed, G-rated, politically correct presentation. This is an ugly situation we have here. And so in order to do that, we have to talk about the truth. Okay. Now, if it is actually, and listen carefully, this is a very important question to ask if this is a failure or the actual policy. Because if it is actually the policy, right, of some group here in the United States, or some agency, some shadowy agency, or some corporation, or group of corporations, or industry, or group of industries, who actually think that the existence of something like ISIS is good for them, maybe profitable for them, then, my friends, we have a very chilling situation on our hands, and we better get to the bottom of it, right? Now, to understand ISIS, we have to go to a little bit about the history of ISIS. You have to understand Al-Qaeda, where it comes from, and you have to understand the idea of a proxy war, right? False flag, they call it. War by proxy. How that works is if the war that you want to wage has no perceivable honorable merits, For example, if it's war to control or steal oil resources, the party waging that war is not likely to gain support for the war from within their own country and around the world. In other words, if you announce, hey, look at all that luscious oil over there, let me just have your tax dollars and your sons and daughters, and let's all go steal it from me, please. You're not likely to get much support. Although, considering the decimation of the moral compass of this country, you might get some takers. Maybe some 40%, I hope not. So in such a case, when you don't have a just cause and you don't have a moral compass, it's better to have some other entity wage that war under a different pretext, so long as the outcome is the one you want, right? It's a rather convoluted methodology. Let's see. We want to secure the oil that's under the ground over there. So let's have grisly beheadings and massive bloodbaths, and somehow, through all the chaos, we'll be able to control the oil resources. That's how they think. That's the world we live in. That's the government you have, that you pay tax dollars for. Right? That's the truth. That's how they think. Right? This is war by proxy. It's an idea that, if you don't know it by now, it's one or more sides of the party, and somebody else do that. As long as they benefit. So that's the first idea we must accustom ourselves to. Because in this new world, wars are seldom fought for honorable reasons anymore. They're actually, maybe defensive wars are, but most of them are fought now for the most despicable reasons. So to understand this latest modern version of war by proxy, we have to go back 30 years to Afghanistan. Meet this man, the father of war by proxy, Zbigniew Brzezinski, my mentor at Columbia University. Many, many years ago, I sat front and center. I was a great admirer of Zbigniew Brzezinski because I'd read all his books. I was kind of like a political junkie as a kid. When I finally got an opportunity to sit in his class, I would sit right in the front and get a chance to talk to him every day. And he was actually a friendly guy. I still have I still kind of like the guy, even though he's one of the most evil liars. I shouldn't say that. I mean, I think he's the architect of this stuff. He describes this stuff, but other people actually do the killing. He doesn't slice it. But he was an advisor to presidents from Kennedy up to the present, except Nixon. He didn't advise Nixon, but all the rest of them, including our current president, who was in the same class at Columbia. Barack Obama was mentored by my mentor, Zbigniew Brzezinski, same class, geostrategic politics. It was called. Now, he is the architect of this country's geostrategic strategy. I'll sum it up really quick because we don't want to get too far into it. The idea is we have to secure Eurasia. Because Eurasian landmass contains 3/4 of the world's population, 3/4 of the world's energy, and 3/4 of the world's resources. Comparatively speaking, North America doesn't really have the people, resources, or oil to mount this challenge, this global challenge. And the Central Eurasian landmass, and the idea goes back 100 years, Alfred Macintyre, British Geographic Society, who also said that this is the pivot region, it's the whole heartland of the planet Earth. And whoever controls that can then project that power out to the rest of the continents, control of the planet. Right? So this is the idea. It's about control of the planet Earth, nothing less. Right? And in the meantime, though, lurking just beneath the surface is the ever-present profits from radio. So they project that, this is a grand clash of empires, they call it, amongst themselves. But when you look at their stock portfolios, they're sitting on the boards of defensive. So this is about In 1978, he created Mujahideen Army to fight the Soviet Union, and at that time it was said to be that this would be the Soviets' version of Vietnam, and he was right. The Afghani quagmire led to the dissolution, breakup of the Soviet Union. So Zbigniew Brzezinski became sort of the man of the hour, breaking up the Soviet Union. That's pretty good. And this proxy army, the Mujahideen, was the seed from which the Taliban, Al-Qaeda, now ISIS is spread. Here's Brzezinski.
U.S. National Security Advisor Brzezinski flew to Pakistan to set about rallying resistance. He wanted to arm the Mujahideen without revealing America's role. On the Afghan border near the Khyber Pass, he urged the soldiers of God to redouble their efforts.
We know of their deep belief in God, and we are confident that their struggle will succeed. That land over there is yours. You'll go back to it.
So here, Brzezinski talk about how concerned he is for their God is ludicrous. Okay. So to make a long story short, Mujahideen became Taliban, Taliban became Al-Qaeda, Al-Qaeda became ISIS. Not exactly, but that's the sum of essence. Now, I'm not going to talk about Al-Qaeda because they're old news now. ISIS is in the limelight. So, I mean, we kind of got used to, kind of desensitized to Al-Qaeda, you know. Yeah, so we needed to change it up a bit. ISIS is a lot scarier than Al-Qaeda. Do we have agreement on that? A lot scarier. Well, ISIS, Al-Qaeda, all they had was distant shots of planes sinking into buildings. Al-Qaeda gives you high definition, slow motion. You see the throat opening up. That's much more gruesome.
ISIS didn't knock down the World Trade Center.
I know, but there's something about building falling doesn't look the same as thousands of people that looks like gurgling to the last breath.
I don't think I'll pay for it.
Sorry? I don't think I'll get it. But terrorism is the most effective way to control people, and it's like a narcotic. Can we have some quiet? It's like a narcotic. You get used to the level that you're taking, then you need to up the ante. And so that's what's going on. Imagine pining for the sanguine halcyon days of Al-Qaeda. So, to understand ISIS history, we have to understand al-Zarqawi. That's largely fictional leader of ISIS. I mean, well, supposedly started Al-Qaeda in Iraq. ISIS. Now, the strange thing about al-Zarqawi is he was reported killed several times by the mainstream media and the government sources from 2003 to 2006. He was killed in northern Iraq in 2003. He was killed once again in Mosul. He was killed during Operation Matador later on. He was killed in Fallujah. And finally, he was killed by a U.S. air raid. You know? And then, actually, he wasn't. The Army Ranger trooper said that he actually didn't die in the air raid. When we took him in the ambulance, I hopped in the ambulance and smashed his head repeatedly against the inside of the ambulance. True story. Until he died. Okay. So, and the thing about it is each time the mainstream media in the United States kills Zarqawi, they never unkill him. They just kill him again. Usually, when you kill someone and then you kill him again, you gotta retract the previous kill. Yes, well, you know, we were maybe wrong about that. Or, oh, we had, they don't. They just say, we killed them in Fallujah, we killed them in Mosul, and people who had read previously that he was already killed, it's like, scratching their head, what? Oh, Zarqawi, the man with 9 lives. But that's the amazing feature of the U.S. press. They can feed us anything, and then people's eyes are open. They don't know this. Al-Zarqawi, Al-Zawahiri, all sounds the same. Until finally, the Washington Post puts out a story, and what do they say? 2006, the military says that they were conducting a propaganda campaign to magnify the role of al-Zarqawi, according to military documents. Right? Military intelligence believed they may have overstated his importance. That's being kind. They created him, most of his stuff, out of whole cloth. He was a fictional character, most of it, okay? And then the document goes on, the article in the New York Post goes on to say that the documents explicitly list the U.S. home audience as one of the targets for the broader campaign. Well, that's one of the targets. How about the main target? And one slide in the briefing actually noted that a selective leak about Zarqawi was made to Dexter Filkins, a New York Times reporter based in Baghdad. Filkins' resultant article, which which I don't have here, but February 9, 2004, appeared on the front page. So this is how news gets made. They just create it and give it to various organizations. Okay, ISIS 2.0. Al-Zarqawi's dead now, finally. We think. Who knows? Abu Omar al-Baghdadi, not to be confused with the current Abu Bakr. There's 2 Baghdadis here in ISIS. This is one of them. Now, the thing about him is almost nothing is known about this previous Baghdadi. Only 4 grainy photos exist. And whenever you hear them say, only 2 grainy photos exist of this guy, it's probably because he's fictional. He was killed along with Abu Ayyab al-Mazri. Al-Mazri was another prominent Al-Qaeda leader, was also reported killed October 3rd, 2006. And again, May 1st, 2007. They love to kill these guys multiple times. Until now, the Reuters comes out to Reuters and said, senior figure in Al-Qaeda, a myth. Baghdadi, Omar Baghdadi, Brigadier General Kevin Bergner told the news conference that Omar al-Baghdadi, the leader of the self-styled Islamic State, which was reportedly set up last year, did not exist. So now, we got 2-0. 2-0. Right? Two of the so-called founders of ISIS, the dreaded terrorist, fake fiction. And it's in the mainstream media. So don't call me a conspiracy theorist. This is documented stuff. Okay. If you believe the New York Times. Or I do. Al-Baghdadi 2.0 brings us to the latest guy. Listen to this. Hold on to your seats, everybody. Hold on to your seats. Only, they said he was described, only 2 known photographs of him exist. You see a pattern? You start to get the picture. Only 2 known photographs of this new fierce 2.0 Baghdadi. Right? And his backstory is as murky as all the fictional characters in this fiction. Right? Now, a video finally surfaced because everybody's saying this guy doesn't exist, and then so they said, okay, let's prop him up and let's have him say something. So he did some sermon. We don't know the depth of this guy, where he's coming from. But apparently, he was at Camp Buka. He stayed at the Hotel Buka in Baghdad. I mean, in the outskirts of actually southern 2004. But he was reported being there from 2004 and other reports as long as 2009. In fact, Army Colonel Kenneth King swears that Baghdadi was there in 2009. When the U.S. government said, no, he absolutely was not there. And you have the Army Colonel who was in charge said, no, he was there. He said when he left, see you in New York. So he even has details of it, okay? So it appears like maybe Baghdadi was in and out. It could move in and out. Now, in The Guardian, there was a, in fact, they ended up calling Camp Buka Jihadi University because you gather all the jihadis in one place and they're going to fraternize with each other and they're going to exchange ideas. Finally, the Martin Chuloff in The Guardian, 2014, comes out with an article supposedly with a disaffected ISIS leader. I don't believe it. I don't think that disaffected ISIS main leaders are going to be talking to the press because they'll last too long. But he reported that Baghdadi also seemed to have a way with his captors. Yeah. Friendly with his with the But as time went on, every time there was a problem in the camp, he was at the center of it. He was kind of like the diplomat there. He was very respected, they say, by the U.S. Army. Imagine that. They respect somebody that they have in their business camp. So in summary, al-Baghdadi is likely to have been positioned at Camp Buka by the U.S. intelligence for the purpose of organizing ISIS. Could be an unwitting asset, maybe a genuine Islamist, but he was identified and heavily financed, identified by the CIA early on as a suitable candidate for an ideological bloodbath or sectarian lines, which will of course require these guys, Raytheon and Halliburton, to come back in and make more money, right? And receive the green light and the green backs to do it. Either way, he bears the unmistakable hallmarks of an asset of Western intelligence and no hallmarks of a serious Islamist leader seeking to establish more likely to be managed by the Saudis or Mossad or a mix of privatized intelligence groups, proxies, and rogue states rather than directly by CIA handlers. This is too far away. These guys gotta farm it out, right? And so there's no shortage of people who will take this job on. And most likely, he will be liquidated in a drone strike in Waziristan, like his fictional predecessors, or some other such fictional end. Where is ISIS getting all the money? Money. That's a big question, right? The question
How about the panelists? How about if we hear from the panelists? You've been speaking for 40 minutes. We can agree with everything you're saying, but many of us came to hear the panelists also.
Who wants me to complete the presentation? Who's learning? All right.
Who doesn't want it?
Get quiet!
You're in the minority. Please quiet down.
Leave! Shut up!
Too busy.
No, you're just making it take longer, guys.
We're gonna have time for the panelists.
You don't know all this stuff. No, you don't.
How do you know what I know?
Yeah.
Continue.
Wrap it up.
We're gonna have time for the panelists.
Doesn't matter. You are not supposed to. It doesn't matter.
We have as much time as we need here. You guys have to be at other engagements.
It's at 5:40.
Get out, please. Let those who came here to hear you.
You're shouting. I'm the
They are trying to hold us. They want to censor you because you speak. I'll wait.
Can you wrap it up in 3 to 5?
No, I can't. So please give it a rest. Okay. So the question of ISIS financing was a non-issue until they burst onto the scene around 2014. Suddenly questions started appearing. Where's the money coming from? Right? And when this started answering the questions, people in this room, people like Webster, people like Wayne, people like Ray, they were answering the questions before the mainstream media.
Yes, introduce them.
Was our two client states, Saudi and Mexico. And it's not a very attractive narrative to have the two closest allies in the region to be financing the world's most bloodthirsty terrorists, so that the narrative had to be changed. Soon, a feature of all the mainstream media narratives that had changed was that, oh, it's not the government of Iraq, of Saudi Arabia at the time, it's individuals, wealthy individuals, and they were careful to say, oh, no, the government doesn't have anything to do with it. So then that narrative transformed into the new narrative that we're dealing with today, self-funding. They're getting the money from black market oil sales, Mosul bank heists, supposedly, kidnapping, extortion, organ harvesting, sex slavery, and coal. Now, they're saying, some reports say $3 million of black market crude oil every day. Right? But ISIS doesn't know how to run a refinery. Scientists, they're just throat slitters. They don't know how to do it. So if we're told that ISIS is selling $3 million of crude oil a day, listen. If you believe that, you're watching too much CNN. Right? Did you know that? Mr. Knows everything? Did you know that you need to sell gasoline on the black market? You can only sell gasoline after it's been refined. That's it. You can't sell crude oil. No such thing as a black market for crude oil. Because the trucks, to truck it out, it takes too much. It doesn't work. Okay. So don't get the CNN story, right? Get it from here. If you can be quiet enough to actually get it. All right, now we're also told that there's a $439 million Mosul bank robbery, right? Sorry, Mosul banks don't have $439 million. And the provincial government, Governor Al-Theo Al-Nujabi says, quoted as in the Washington Post and others, is confirming the robbery story. June 10th, right? But now he's also quoted in the Financial Times saying nobody until now has confirmed that story. So we've got provincial governors being reported as supporting that story and didn't. And now the United States is backtracking on that story. Right? They're saying, oh, well, maybe that didn't happen. And who is the source of the bank heist story? This man. Ahmed Shalabi, the official U.S. neocon puppet in Iraq. Okay. Did you know that? I bet you didn't know that. Yeah, you know that.
Stop provoking and let's start presenting.
Don't play with the group.
Yeah.
We've got great speakers waiting to speak.
Take over of the workshop.
As well as him, and he's talking 45
Yeah, well,
minutes.
yes. Kidnapping, extortion, organ harvesting, sex slavery, and tolls. No, you can't get enough money for a kidnapping victim over there to run a war against two nations. Sorry, sex slavery, that might be a bull market, but that's about it. And toll booths, sorry. ISIS funding narratives is like everything else in these U.S. crimes against humanity, a shill fraud. And literally every organ of officialdom is going along with this fraud, this narrative. The media, the political class, the money class, even the left is going along with it. Right? Now, where are they getting all their weapons? Well, on June 10th, they stormed Mosul and supposedly grabbed howitzers and 150 million Humvees, 1,500 Humvees, Stinger missiles, you know, a whole host of it. They didn't even have a Black Hawk helicopter, supposedly. Now, do you know how easy it would be for the United States to locate the whereabouts of this supposed Black Hawk helicopter and send a lovely Raytheon cruise missile to say hello to it and get rid of it? It would be a simple matter, right? But they left that Black Hawk helicopter there for days and days and days while ISIS had photo opportunities with it standing on top of it. I'm sorry, there's not an instruction manual in a Black Hawk helicopter to learn how to use it. They don't know how to fly a Black Hawk, and they don't know how to use most of these weapons, and they don't know how to run an oil refinery. Wake up! Don't believe. Did you know that? Yeah. Okay.
Stop it.
At the
This
same
guy's good.
time as the June 10th taking of Mosul, ISIS seized uranium.
Can't hear you. Can you
Mosul
start from the
University was
beginning
completely conveniently right into this dirty bombing because we were hammered into the previous thing by the neocons and that idiot from Texas, George Bush. But it's not like a group of ultra-violent misfit teenagers, which is basically what ISIS is, would even know that there was uranium in Mosul University. They had to be directed to the uranium by an intelligence group, period. Because they're just throat slicers. They don't have any strategic vision. If they're rampaging around the world and winning 2 countries, that's because somebody in the shadows is helping them. Now, so the summary so far, the leaders are fictitious, all of them. The self-financing narrative is patently bogus. The bank heist never happened. The 3 million a day from black market crude, like I said, only works if you get your news from Anderson Cooper and all those jerks in the mainstream media. If you get your news from credible sources like Webster Tarpley, myself, Ray McGovern, Wayne Madsen, then you're going to have a different...
Let's do that.
Oh, boy.
Got it. Uranium. These people would never know. ISIS has adopted production values. Gone are the blurry, grainy videos of Al-Qaeda. They've now upped the ante. Insert grisly high definition image here. I never got a chance to get a good throat slitting image for you, so you see my use of children.
Thank you.
Western intelligence for potent propaganda purposes. 0% chance that this 7-year-old Libyan girl painted her face in the Libyan flag and wrote, in English, by the way, "Even my doll hates Gaddafi." 0%. And the use of children will not advance the foundation of formation of the caliphate. Its sole purpose is to effectively target the sensibilities of the These wars benefit U.S. defense contractors, the state of Israel, no one else. Canadian asset. Canadian intelligence asset, Mohammed al-Rashid, was caught smuggling underage British girls into ISIS, right? Underage girls, right? Now, usually that's the linchpin issue. I mean, underage kids, right? That story lasted 4 days, and we never got a follow-up.
Excuse me, I'm going to intervene.
No, please don't.
You made the point already.
No group is actually trying to build capital only intelligence assets.
We got it.
Thank you.
The documents. The management of savagery. That's a very important document. Written in 2004 by the mysterious Al-Najib. Nothing is known about him, another one of these. Nothing is known about him. The management of savagery is one picture. Not 2, 3, one picture. 2004. Al-Arabiya Institute for Studies reported the author saying, which please keep it down. The Al-Arabiya Institute for Studies has reported the author being Mohammed Hakim Abu Jihad al-Mazri. U.S. claims that Abu Jihad Mazri, another fictional character, Abu Jihad, the father of the struggle, and al-Mazri being the Egyptians. They claim he worked out of Iran. Right? Well, he was killed in a strike in was his. And if you want to you want to get rid of a fictional character, you do so in Waziristan. Waziristan is no man's land. No information is in and out. The document itself mentions Sykes-Picot. It talks about the power of vexation to exhaust the power of the United States, draw our military, precisely what our military wants. Well, our military doesn't. The administration of savagery, the power of the establishment of the state.
Which one?
Kidnapping, money. But this document says the attack of oil interests, speed.
Did you get a good picture? She took a picture of me. Yeah.
Where are the panelists?
Yeah. This one is taking pictures.
Good luck. It left a while ago. It didn't look like it would be such an effort.
To work with the size.
But why bother inviting a panel when the whole thing is about him? Why bother having a panel? Be one thing.
Would the panelists like to go to another room to have a chance to talk, or should we just walk out? No, I'm not being quiet. This is. Thank you. I appreciate your taking my photo too.
Don't want to leave because I don't want to leave because I want to hear other people. I don't want to leave because I want to hear other people. I don't want to leave because I want to hear other people. You don't tell me to leave, okay? Don't tell me to leave. Don't tell me to leave. You sit down and let other people talk.
You are behaving like a friend. You are behaving like a friend. That's how you're behaving.
No, I'm sick and tired of you trying to run the show.
Why don't you go after him?
I'm not listening to you. I'm not listening to you. Okay, you're not the boss here. Nobody put you in charge.
In conclusion,
I want to hear from other people. That's why I came here. I've heard enough from you. I want to hear from other people. Get out of here. You get out. You get out. You get out. You're not going to go. In conclusion,
okay, I'm going to conclude if you can have some silence for 5 minutes more.
Thank you.
At least you made more room.
you're not going to bully me.
Totally crazy.
I have 4 more slides. And you're going, yes. Well, more slides. Howard, please shut
To sum it up, he stopped it. Who's the moderator? He said to sum it up. You want to let him finish. I'm about to end it.
No, we don't want to hear him anymore.
He's about to end it, so just let him finish it.
Let's hear this big bird.
At this point, wouldn't you just sit down? You realize you're the problem. Sit down. Sit down.
Keep moving on.
Clap if you can hear me once! Clap if you can hear me once!
Yes, there you go.
4 more slides. Here we go.
Thank you.
To sum it up, a very tiny handful of billionaires and the vast networks of politicians and businessmen who serve them are only concerned about this short-term profits. They have hijacked our future. And lurking not far in the background is this of this war.
You're an agent, man.
Shut up, get out of here.
Keep slowing it down.
Billionaires considers their fortunes to be more considerate, more important than the human species, right?
How do people understand
They decided that they're going to introduce this ultra-violent, ultra-covert military and police. And
Bye, Felicia.
to protect what they...
You can Google later.
Yeah. So they've introduced an ultra-lethal form of violence in order to protect their profits, right? So this perpetual state of war mentality that the human race has not seen since the Middle Ages, really, is just for short-term profits for a handful of people. This is how they're dismantling our future. And they've enlisted all of the organs of officialdom to do it, right? Humankind's a young species. We're only 8,000 years old, right? That's nothing. So if at this nascent stage we let the direction that we're going to be dictated by this ultra-violence like this, then I'm sorry, this is not the way to lead. And looking at what's going on in these corridors of power, State Department, animals, we're heading to a very dark place for this race. And I don't want the human race to be racist and violent.
Talk loud.
Oh no. Stop talking.
Cops are going around shooting, killing people, and because we resist. I have no idea. Or where the layers upon layers of covert, state-sponsored proxy armies of murderers really slice their way through history to the next of this. Thank you. All of you that appreciate it, thank you.
You roar out your welcome. You roar out your welcome.
Jews aren't Semites, Arabs are Semites. Oh, God help us.
We'd like to thank everyone for their patience. We've had a long conference, and it's very warm in here. Blood sugar levels may be low. So, I will attempt to perhaps offer a conceptual framework. We have to thank Vox for giving us a wealth and abundance of empirical material. So maybe I can move a little bit more quickly now with certain concepts that can be used to subsume the questions that he's talking about. Also to address how to deal with ISIS, because I think ISIS is paper tiger.
Could you introduce?
Yes, my name is Webster Tarpley. I'm the author of a number of books. I'm also from the Tax Wall Street Party. We have any number of
we have a sign-up sheet going around the room that puts you on a subscription list to our morning briefing. So
Right,
if you could
which
just
includes-
sign your name on that thing going around, you'll get our morning briefing every morning.
And I write for it, and we've been endorsed by Lionel, the famous entertainer, so please do take a look at that. Now, here's my thesis. The term comes from the Cold War, the secret army, specifically the CIA secret army. Vox showed us the CIA secret army that was assembled in Afghanistan in the 1980s. We can also remember the anti-Castro Cubans who landed at the Bay of Pigs. That was a CIA secret army. The Contras of Nicaragua, a CIA secret army. So this ought to be a well-known concept. It's a form of proxy warfare, as Vox was saying. And we need to combine this with the concept of the death squads. That is to say, groups of assassins, terrorists, but acting together and sowing terrorism and chaos. These, of course, have been used very often in Central America, very often in Southeast Asia, and now in Southwest Asia. And in particular, the capability of the death squad that we want to be aware of is it can get in between two existing forces, and it can provoke them. In other words, it can fire in one direction, fire in the other direction, disappear, and leave the two forces fighting each other. Now, the general framework of the entire program is what? What is the goal of this action of chaos and so forth? It is the campaign of the US government, the British government, NATO, against the modern nation state. Now, for many reasons, the imperialist powers want to destroy all opposition to their exorbitant power. So it's the attack on the modern state. Whenever you see non-state actors, terrorist groups, death squads, secret armies, they're in the process of carrying out this policy. The mini-states, microscopic entities, always petty, impotent, tiny, incapable of resisting ExxonMobil, JP Morgan Chase, whatever it is. Microstates, some are even smaller. Failed states, right? The example of Libya is perhaps the most chilling example of where this all leads. And then, of course, rump states, don't forget them. What's left when you carve a country and you remain with a kind of an embittered hulk of other people. Partitions. We've seen the partition of Serbia. We've seen the partition of Sudan. The partition of Iraq is very much on the agenda into those parts. There is a Bernard Lewis plan from the British Arab Bureau and the Princeton Institute for Advanced Study, where they go through how you can carve Iran into 5 parts, you can carve Pakistan into 4 parts, Turkey destined to be carved, and so forth. Warlords. When the British look at China, they say, well, in the 1920s, there were 25 warlord regimes in China. Why not go back to that? And of course, the idea is that the imperialists wish to be confronted with a totally atomized map, a crazy quilt of petty, impotent states, subdivisions. Whenever you hear anybody talking about secession of any kind, they are generally acting as useful idiots or conscious agents of this despicable CIA strategy. Now, in this conference, I've been trying to talk up the Donetsk People's Republic. So you may say, hey, isn't that a contradiction, right? You've been to Donetsk, and you're saying that they have a right to exist. They are, of course, comparable to the state of West Virginia. Virginia left the Union on the basis of slavery. The mountain counties of West Virginia said, no, we don't want to stay with those tidewater aristocrats. We want to go back to the Union. So in that sense, the Donetsk and Lugansk experiences are people who are going back to where they were. See, so it's not comparable. So the idea is non-state actors. I would propose for you as a principle, any state, any nation state should be your ally. And most of these non-state actors, not so. Now, we can take a shortcut through the exhaustive detail that was presented. Our vice president, in one of his ragbag moments, decided to tell everybody, he blurted out in Cambridge, Massachusetts, that Turkey and Saudi Arabia, he said, our allies are financing the terrorists of Syria because those governments are so angry at Assad because he refuses to dry up and blow away. And when he did that, the current president of Turkey, Erdogan, freaked out. He demanded apologies, and he said, I want a real apology, not just a half-baked, namby-pamby apology. Now, this is Erdogan of Turkey, the neo-Ottoman. He believes that he will, in effect, the caliph is going to be him, right? Because remember, the Ottoman emperor, the Ottoman sultan, the Turkish sultan, was until about 1920, at the same time, the caliph of Islam. So he's got his own ideas. He is, of course, an agent of the Muslim Brotherhood, and he freaked out and demanded these apologies. I would have to point out, as a general principle of the discussion, the CIA and the Muslim Brotherhood have been in a worldwide alliance for decades. So don't hesitate to attack the Muslim Brotherhood. Who are they? They're the oligarchs. That's the 1% in those countries. The Muslim Brotherhood, bankers, businessmen, editors, doctors, lawyers, those are the rich people. And they hide themselves using the cloak of religion and the cloak of social solidarity to essentially pursue an agenda of power and benighted power. In other words, it's a power based on rolling back the society. Okay, now we get to the heart of the matter. Ambassador John Negroponte. His name will be eternally linked to the notion of the death squads. And wherever he appeared, wherever he went, goes still, I think, in the world, death squads appeared as if by magic. So Negroponte, of course, started off in Central America and related areas. He showed up as U.S. ambassador to Iraq in 2004-2005, the bringer of the death squad doctrine. This is where it all starts. Now, why did they do this? Of course, the idea is that the Iraq War in 2003, 2004 was already going very badly. So the idea is, if you have to fight the entire united Iraqi population, your situation is hopeless. What you need to do is to start them fighting among themselves, right? And this has all these names: the Anbar Awakening, the Sunni Awakening, combined with the 2007 surge. This is how they kept the war going all those times, right? Money is, of course, a factor, but we're also talking great power geopolitics, right? The great game and all the rest of this. Now, the direct disciple, here's Negroponte, his disciple, Ambassador Robert Ford, who worked closely with Negroponte early in his career, he showed up in Syria in 2011 at exactly the moment the death squads were appearing there in large numbers. Now, I know whereof I speak. I was in Homs, one of the hotbeds of this death squad activity or revolution in 2011. And in an Alawite neighborhood of Homs, I was confronted by people at a hospital who said, "We're getting killed by snipers. Snipers on rooftops are killing us. They're shooting at women who pick up their kids at school. They're shooting at people coming out of the clinic." And they said, "We want more tanks. We want more Syrian army. We want the Syrian army with helicopters and on the rooftops and with tanks to protect us from these butchers." And the Syrian government at that time, of course, they showed you third force people. There was demonstration, police, and in the middle somebody shooting. Right? They were in both directions. Right? Those are the death squads. Lots of them are foreign fighters, always have been. Libyans, Saudis, but from essentially the entire relevant world, from Morocco to Indonesia and so forth. Now, just as a kind of a sidelight on that, Benghazi, what was that? Well, after the death of Gaddafi in 2011, towards the end of the year, right, and I was in Syria at this time, and you could see that it was coming by November 2011. There was a massive transfer of terrorist fighters, that is to say the patsy pool, right? These young men with no wives, no jobs, no prospects, no nothing, who then have to be organized by an intelligence agency, to be sure, to become these fighters. So they had to be moved from Libya to Syria via Turkey. Ambassador Stevens, right, the U.S. diplomat who got killed in the process, had his last conversation on earth with a Turkish official. Why Turkey? Because this was the idea. They were sending these killers. So James Foley. Now here's the tragedy, is that ISIS so far has only been able to kill people who willingly delivered themselves into the hands of ISIS. In other words, you have to go there and put yourself under their jurisdiction, and that's how they can kill you. There are no cases of, ISIS reaching into Europe or something like this and killing people, with these methods. At least no significant ones that I'm aware of. This guy went there because he sincerely believed in the righteousness of the cause of the Syrian rebels. The ones I would have to call the Syrian terrorist rebels, because that's what they were from the word go. There never was a nonviolent phase in the Syrian revolution. Never. The Syrian revolution had been violent going back to 1980 against Hafez Assad. It was violent continuously. There never was this wonderful halcyon phase of being nonviolent. So he put himself under their control, and at a certain point they said, okay, guess what, you're a prisoner. Now the other thing about him is he went to Aleppo and he began writing articles about the ISIS rule, or in this case the terrorist rebel Nusra, whatever it was, rule in Aleppo. And he began writing dispatches, which you can see, where he says, wait a minute, this government is actually not that popular. They're really not that efficient. I'm beginning to wonder whether this is the right way to go at all. That's when he was declared expendable, and then he entered into his career as a prisoner, and then as a victim. So of course, I condemn the assassination, I deplore the assassination. At the same time, we cannot let the United States be dragged into war because of people who insisted on going to ISIS or their predecessors to help them. This is unacceptable. And we have to realize the role of Allen is to prevent the destruction of ISIS. The United States is waging a phony war. Remember the phony war in 1939, 1940, between France and Britain on one side and Nazi Germany on the other? They just sat there, right? The drôle de guerre, the Sitzkrieg. Well, in this case, you look at the combat bulletins, they say 20 sorties were flown against ISIS today, and then we find out half of them didn't do anything, they simply came back. Why? Because, of course, the interest of Allen is to keep ISIS intact. He's the defeatist. He's an appeaser of ISIS. He wants to keep ISIS intact, and he wants to keep the myth of their invincibility, if he can, even though it's been sharply undercut, to keep that, to use them elsewhere. What is the elsewhere? Well, Lebanon is an obvious one. Syria. I'm getting very worried that after all these years of fighting, that the Syrian army can't hold up anymore. I don't know, but it looks dangerous to me because this endless stream of crazies and fanatics, psychotics, some of them coming from Australia have actually been documented as psychotics going to fight for ISIS there. They've been grinding down the Syrian army. God help us if ISIS takes over the entirety of Syria. After that, ISIS could be used against Iran. And then why stop there? Chechnya, the entire Muslim Central Asian region would be a made-to-order place for these lunatic planners, Zbigniew Brzezinski and others, right? Because the idea of using it in Central Asia meshes perfectly with what Vox was saying about Brzezinski and the Grand Chessboard. Now, 2 more slides. The policy to smash ISIS. You can get rid of them. This is not a mystery. Number 1, ultimatum to Turkey. Close the Turkish-Syrian border. Nobody gets across. No ISIS goods, oil, gasoline, whatever it is, gold, money, I don't care, and no war supplies come in. That border is sealed, okay? If Turkey doesn't like that, then turn the screws. Use Incirlik Air Base. You say, you want to stay in NATO? I'm anti-NATO, but you got to find some way to scare the Turks. You want to stay in NATO? We want Incirlik Air Base if we need it. At the same time, an ultimatum to the Saudis, Qatar, the Gulf Cooperation Council in general, right? Kuwait, Oman, Emirates, the rest of them. Stop all money going to ISIS, Nusra, and Al-Qaeda, and these other groups. Just stop it. And of course they'll say, as Vox pointed out, They'll say, oh, the government doesn't do that. Those are these misguided individuals. Stop it, or else. That's a very unpopular monarchy. If the United States cut them loose, they would be doing it. Let's maybe we'll see that in our time. And of course, stop U.S. direct support through Turkey, Jordan, and so forth. Stop Israeli direct support, right? Stop French and other NATO direct support through these areas. At the same time, I'm sorry, military means cannot be excluded, right? Because if those guys were headed for your town and we're going to behead you, you'd like to see some airstrikes, I'm sure. Although, as you see, this is not the main thrust of the analysis that I'm giving. Okay, in conclusion, 1992, I wrote my unauthorized biography of George H.W. Bush the Elder. This is the one that reminded the world that his father, Prescott Bush, had participated in financing the seizure of power by Adolf Hitler in Germany in 1933, that his father had been expropriated of shares in Union Bank here downtown under the Alien Property Custodian under the Trading with the Enemy Act. This book is online for free. You want to read that? Go home tonight, read it for free, with my compliments. It's been up there since October 1996, meaning that next year we'll celebrate 20 years of Bush Online. So, where does this go back to? What is this nightmare in the Middle East, right? Well, I'm afraid it starts with Operation Desert Shield, Operation Desert Storm, the first Gulf War, because that's the toppling of, the weakening of Saddam, and this beginning of a constant U.S. presence, and the launching of economic sanctions, which killed more than 1 million children. You remember, Madeleine Albright was asked, is it worth it to kill 1 million kids for democracy? And Madeleine Albright said, of course, of course. Now you get the harvest of hate. Huh? I'm not sure.
That's what he asked,
the
half a
harvest of hate. The harvest of hate does come home to roost, and I think we have to look back. The tendencies that have led to this tragic condition began then. We have got to extirpate them root and branch and go back to it. And of course, remember that this war was actually urged on Bush by Margaret Thatcher, who, as the press wrote, performed an emergency backbone transplant on Bush the Elder. So I thank you for your kind attention.
In the interest of brevity, I know it's been a long afternoon and everybody's hot. To quote Bill Clinton, I feel your pain. I'm Wayne Madsen, editor of the Wayne Madsen Report. We're actually next week are celebrating our 10th year. 9 years ago, I reported that Dennis Hastert was involved in unsavory activities as a wrestling coach at Yorkville High School. I was called the other day by MSNBC. They said, oh, looks like you broke the story. I said, yeah, well, where were you guys 9 years ago? You had to wait for an indictment when everybody in Yorkville, Illinois knew about this. But anyway, I want to paraphrase Walt Kelly, Pogo cartoon fame, we've met the enemy and they are us. Another thing I want to mention is somebody asked about that lapel flag. I'm an amateur vexillologist. That means I study flags. That is the pre-Assad Syrian flag, which has been adopted by the Free Syrian Army, the Syrian opposition, as their flag. Although he should have had the ISIL flag on his ISIS flag on his lapel.
Isn't it the French colonial flag?
No, it was after the French colonial status. This was the flag on independence when Syria gained its independence. I believe it was right after World War II when the French government reasserted its authority in Syria. How in the hell, after 14 years, did what was Al-Qaeda wind up being our ally? Now, the reason I say that here in New York is that Al-Qaeda was used as the boogeyman on September 11th, 2001, and the years after to convince everyone in the country that we had to sacrifice our civil liberties, sacrifice the Constitution, the Bill of Rights to fight this group Al-Qaeda. And of all the cities in the United States, maybe barring Arlington, Virginia, where the Pentagon was hit that day, people in New York should be totally upset that we are now allied with this particular group because they were the boogeyman. And now we are supporting them through ISIL, which, you know, is the morphed result of what was originally Al-Qaeda. There was a Freedom of Information Act request submitted by, well, it's a very right-wing group, Judicial Watch. However, the document that they put forward, they got as a result of their FOIA, really says everything. August 5th, 2012. It looks like it's a Defense Intelligence Agency report, and I've done many FOIA requests. And normally the redactions, the blacked out area, come in the body, the text of the message, but I noted in what was released, some of the header information, that's the from to info at ease, are redacted. And I found that to be very, very unusual. One of the parts that's redacted is where it came from. Now, it could have come from the Defense Attaché office at the U.S. Embassy in Baghdad, but it's not clear, although it's titled Iraq Intelligence Report. But the operative paragraph in that report, 2012, August, if the situation unravels, there is the possibility of establishing a declared or undeclared Salafist principality in eastern Syria, Hasaka and Deir Zor, and this is exactly what the supporting powers to the opposition want. They define the supporting powers. The Western countries, Turkey, and the Gulf states. Western countries, United States, Britain, NATO, Israel. Supporting the Gulf states, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, United Arab Emirates, Kuwait, Bahrain. Oman, by the way, is not very supportive of this operation because they have basically abstained from this Saudi coalition that's fighting against the Zaidi, which is known as the Houthis in Yemen. I think it's interesting that the State Department and President Obama himself does not use the term ISIS. In the Arab world, they say Daesh, which is a concatenation of the Arabic word for this group. But they insist on using ISIL. And I noticed that the neocons, I hear them on television. I mean, I watch those things so you don't have to. The neocons hate the term ISIL. And some of them said, well, we think Obama's using it because it's his subtle way to jab at Netanyahu because ISIL sounds like Israel. Well, let me suggest why that is. And that is news reports that we've seen from the field. Last year, some farmers in northern Israel, actually in the city of Nazareth Illit, found a bag that had fallen out of a pickup truck. And when they went and opened up the bag, 25 brand new ISIL black and white flags were in the bag. This was reported in the Israeli media. And just, this is still May, right? This month, at Ben Gurion Airport in Tel Aviv, the Customs Authority seized a box of 25, a box of rings. I don't know how many, there were several rings. They come from Istanbul, but the rings were the ISIL insignia, the motto, which also appears on the Israeli flag, and the ISIL flag. What is this?
It's a flood warning. This is the police state letting you know.
Flash flood warning in Manhattan.
What was the joke? Al-Bakawi.
Rings being seized at Ben Gurion Airport, I doubted that was a result of Sarah Netanyahu ordering them from the Holmes shopping channel.
So we explain what it is.
What's it?
What is it?
Significance of it, of the flags.
Oh, the flags, yeah. Well, the flags were obviously heading, they found them in northern Israel, they were on their way to the Syrian border. So, you know, we've seen this time and time again. When the first protest started in Benghazi against Gaddafi, we saw the monarch, the old monarchy of Libya, the Kingdom of Libya flag, brand new, still had the folds, the creases on them. These were factory fresh. People tried to say people had these stored in their cedar chests and from 1969 when the flag was still, no, these were rolled out of factories. Same thing with this pre-Assad Syrian flag. You see this time and time again in many of the countries. Now in Ukraine, for example, you see the old Ukraine Insurgent Army, the black and red flag, which was the Nazis, Banderist movement. They were the allies of the German Gestapo. Committed many. So flags, I would suggest, are very important, especially brand spanking new ones that show up on central squares in Kiev and in Damascus and in Benghazi and in Tripoli. Keep your eyes on those flags.
Who's producing them? Who's producing this flag?
Oh, I'm sure it's probably a CIA
cottage industry. I run a little thing.
Some flag manufacturer. There's some up in that, but they're probably made in Asia. I think at least they should buy American.
Kim Kardashian.
I was in Iran last September and October, and I was driving with my driver and another person. From Shiraz to a town called Jerome, which is about 125 kilometers from the Persian Gulf. And I noticed the police were pulling people over. And I said, what is that? And they said, well, it's happening all over Iran now because they pull people over who look Arab. And they think that they could be ISIL terrorists and they have found them in Iran. They have crossed over from Iraq into Iran, basically in the Kurdish area. And I said, well, gee, you know, you ought to advertise that more. You'd probably find a lot of people like Pam Geller would love the fact that Iranian police are stopping people because they look Arab.
Why is it ISIL, ISIS? The Times always says ISIS or ISIL.
Pardon my Arabic, I don't speak it, but Daesh is a concatenation of Al-Dawla, Al-Islamiyya, fi Iraq, wa Al-Sham. Al-Sham is basically greater Syria, what was Syrian Lebanon. It's also known as the Levant. When France had it, it was Lebanon and Syria. So that is, you know, it's a nuanced thing. So it's either, some people say ISIS because it's Al-Sham, which is the term for greater Syria or the Levant. And you know, I think, I actually kind of agree that Obama may be using that ISIL term, and he insists on using it as a subtle jab against Netanyahu. Now there's been other indications that this group is supported by U.S. and Western intelligence. We know, for example, that they have found Chechens from the Republic of Georgia carrying Georgian passports. They've been caught in Iraq and Syria. So here we have a nexus with what's going on against Russia. That was explained by Webster when he mentioned that this could be expanded into Chechnya, Dagestan, and the other very volatile, predominantly Muslim republics in southern Russia. It was found that another spin-off group called the Khorasan Group. Now they sound like they ought to have a brass plate downtown, like a Wall Street financial advisor. The Khorasan Group. I mean, where did they come up with this name? That the guy who was their major agent, one of their major officials, was a so-called ex-French DGSE intelligence agent named David Drujon. And he was a leader of the Khorasan Group, and they said he defected from the DGSE and went to work for the Khorasan Group, which is another subsidiary of ISIS, ISIL, and the al-Nusra Front. And people say, well, the al-Nusra Front, that's Al-Qaeda, and they don't like ISIL. Come on, we're talking about the same thing. I'll tell you what doesn't exist is the Free Syrian Army and these so-called moderates. They do not exist. If you believe that there's moderates in the Syrian rebel forces, but you might believe in Santa Claus and the Easter Bunny and the Tooth Fairy, because these individuals are not to be found anywhere. The only person that thinks they exist is John McCain, Insane McCain, and I don't think we can take anything he says seriously. More indications about ISIL's links to the Western intelligence. There's a guy named Walid Jumblat. He's the head of the Lebanese Druze Party, and he has basically taken bribes from the United Arab Emirates, wealthy people who support ISIL, in return for ISIL releasing Druze prisoners, hostages. And he's made no bones about the fact. He also said, yeah, we also told these Druze in Syria that were taken hostage in Idlib. That whole province, by the way, has now fallen completely under the control of ISIL. We urged them to convert to Wahhabist Islam. The Druze, of course, are not recognized as Muslims by most mainstream Muslim organizations. The Canadian ambassador to Jordan is known, and his name is Bruno Sacomani. He's a former head of the personal security detail for Stephen Harper, the Canadian Prime Minister, who, oddly enough, made him the ambassador to Amman. Everybody in Canada said, why? The guy has no experience as a diplomat. Well, that's not what they're looking for. They're looking for somebody who will support ISIL in Amman. And this guy's name came up, and others came up. The Turkish foreign minister actually outed them, the Canadians, because they said they found that the Canadian Security Intelligence Service was facilitating the travel of young girls from Canada to Syria to supposedly fight for ISIL. If you read, you're not going to get this from the mainstream, but if you read the Middle East media and other select sites, you're going to pick up all this intelligence. What I think my friend Ray at his old agency called indication warnings and chatter. It all indicates that there's a close coordination between Western intelligence and ISIL. And Adrian Kaba, who represents Sweden's Social Democratic Party in the region of Malmö, basically said that ISIL is trained by the CIA. The Chechen president, Kadyrov, said ISIL is a product of the CIA. The aide to Putin said ISIL is trained and sponsored by the CIA. So how many people do we need to say ISIL is run by us before we actually believe it? The only people that won't believe it are these clowns a couple blocks over at CNN at Columbus Circle who think that this group is just one of these terrorist organizations that we have no control over. I would suggest we not only have control over them, we started them and we continue to nourish them. The worst example was recently ISIL claimed credit for going through a Saudi military checkpoint in the town of Qadhi in eastern Saudi Arabia, where they blew up a Shia mosque, killed several people, tens of people, dozens of people, and they passed through a Saudi military checkpoint to commit that terrorist attack. Obviously, King Salman, and I'm talking about the fish from Alaska, decided it was going to be in the interests of Saudi Arabia to commit a terrorist attack in the kingdom, which usually they don't like terrorist attacks, but this was directed against Shias in the eastern province, as a message to other Shias: don't even think about challenging the monarchy. And I think it's quite clear from the Defense Intelligence Agency report that the reason we supported and continue to support ISIL is not only to bring down Assad, but as it's stated, the Shia dominated areas of Iraq. The Iraqi government is Shia dominated, Iran, and also the Zaidi sect, the Houthis of Yemen. And they would have never revolted had Gerald Fierstein, the former U.S. ambassador to Yemen, not come up with this plan for a federal Yemen, which took the Houthi areas, the Zaidi areas, and split them right down the middle and gave them to 2 different provinces. That's why they originally resulted. Why are we dictating the future of this country, Yemen, and we know what's happened as a result? The country's enmeshed in a terrible civil war. The Saudi planes using cluster munitions, U.S. made, and committing other atrocities, destroying mosques, ancient mosques in North Yemen, and of course ISIL, we know, specializes in destroying not only Shia mosques, but even Sunni mosques, and also the antiquities, which they're actually ripping that stuff off and selling it on the international black market in many cases. You saw a couple videos of them taking chainsaws and hammers to some things in Mosul, but I would suggest that most of that stuff is being offered up on the black market out of both Syria and Iraq, and also Libya. So thank you for your attention.
I've got good news and I've got bad news. First, the bad news. I've had a whole hour to make my speech longer. I've had a half hour to trim it down to about 10 minutes.
Good use of your time.
No, I really appreciate the chance to be with you all, because I see you as hungry for the truth, right? The truth is not easy to get. Certainly not in the New York Times, the Washington Post, Wall Street Journal, LA Times, anywhere else in a so-called mainstream media. Now, I can't do anything other than underscore the importance of the military, industrial, congressional, corporate, media, security services complex, okay? It's there, all right? And it's big. It explains a whole lot about this stuff, as Webster and Wayne have already said. So, since they've done such a good job of emphasizing that aspect, I'm going to try to emphasize another aspect, and that is another country that was mentioned here in passing, and that's the country of Israel. What kind of role do they play in all this? Now, I have to talk about neocons. And neocons, I remember I talked about neocons for a couple of years before I was attacked on a right-wing blog saying, McGovern, smart guy, he thinks he's getting away with it. He really means Israelis, that's what he means, you know. He's anti-Semitic, that's what he is. Well, not really. I mean, not at all. The way I define a neocon is someone who has great difficulty distinguishing between the strategic interests or needs of Israel on the one hand, and the strategic interests and needs of the United States on the other hand. Now, as Senator Moynihan said, everybody's entitled to their own opinion, right? But I don't think those people should be running the U.S. foreign policy, and that's what I object to. And I see that thread coming through here, through this whole discussion. Next week, we celebrate the 48th anniversary of the attack on the USS Liberty. How many people have not heard about the attack on the USS Liberty? Good. This is a very unusual audience, okay? Now what does that mean? Simply it means that the attack on the USS Liberty, and even more precisely, the U.S. reaction to that, showed the state of Israel that they could literally get away with murder, murdering 32 or some of our U.S. naval deliberately, and we would cover up for them. That's how deep their influence has been, and that's how deep their influence is. And I just cite that because we're preparing for the 48th anniversary. There are some USS Liberty veterans left, and we always go to Arlington Cemetery to celebrate that. So, what about U.S. aims toward Syria? And how do they differ from Israeli aims toward Syria? Easy. They don't. They're the same. All right? Remember,
remember how Obama was mousetrapped by the neocons into declaring, aha, let's do a red line. Anybody remember what the red line was? All right, you Syrians are really bad guys, but if you use or even move your chemical weapons, I'm going to change my attitude, right? So what happens? What happens is chemical attacks outside Damascus blamed on whom? Bashar al-Assad. John Kerry gets up 35 times on the 30th of August 2013. Bashar al-Assad, Bashar al-Assad, Bashar al-Assad mounted these chemical attacks. There were lies then, and there are lies now. The sarin used was not from Syrian government stocks. It was homemade sarin done by the rebels. Now, Ted Postal was mentioned before. You want real authorities, like people who know how far a rocket can go, or what kind of sarin is needed to do this kind of thing. Don't take my word for it. Look at the authorities. My colleague Robert Perry has written extensively about this. It's a terrible deception, and most Americans think that the Syrian government did these chemical attacks. Well, what was the purpose of that? Well, that was to mousetrap us out of, mousetrap President Obama. Well, look, the neocons went to him and said, look, you said you gotta intervene there because you said you were going to do it. Now you're going to be look very weak if you don't do the red line thing, right? Now, why all that? Do you remember? Assad was winning. Assad was gaining footing in places where the other guys had taken root. And so Israelis and others wanted to get the U.S. involved militarily, because once the U.S. gets involved militarily, you don't what? You don't lose. Right. Okay, so it's as simple as that. So on the 30th of August, Kerry says all these things. You lose eventually. You don't lose in the immediate future. So Kerry says this on the 30th. Obama, we fully expected him on the 31st of August 2013. He was going into the Rose Garden. There were about 200 of us out there in front of the White House demonstrating, saying, oh God, this is really going to be bad. And we get word from inside, he's not going to do it. He's not going to do it. He changed his mind. Okay? Now, why did he change his mind? Well, there are a whole bunch of reasons. Not only us outside, but the fact that American people didn't want it. The British people had already voted against it in Parliament. The first time they voted against the war in 3,400 years. All right? And it was clear that sarin was not sarin from Syrian government stocks, and the British told us that because they got a sample, they tested it, and tore it down, and found out that. So he stepped back from the brink. But what happened? Well, the neocons were furious. Oh man, they were out of their gourd. Okay. Now, Jody Ruderin, who is the New York Times Jerusalem bureau chief, she was kind of new at the job, So she says, "Well, hey, let's talk to some Israelis and find out what their interests are in Syria." So she does. And here's a quote from Jody's her piece. Let's see, September 2nd, 2013. So just 2 days after Obama decides not to unleash the weaponry against Syria. Here's a quote. For Jerusalem, according to my talks, the status quo, horrific as it might be from a humanitarian perspective, seems preferable to either a victory by Mr. Assad's government and his Iranian backers, or a strengthening of the rebel groups, increasingly dominated by Sunni jihadists. She asked about Israel's priorities, and it became crystal clear when she asked about what's your preferred outcome. They said, that's easy, no outcome. I said, what? No, well, come on, give me a break, no outcome. And then she talked to a couple other guys, and here's Alon Pincus, former Israeli consul general in New York. Quote, this is a playoff situation in which you need both teams to lose. But at least you don't want one team to win. We'll settle for a tie. Let them both bleed, hemorrhage to death. That's the strategic, that is the strategic thinking here in Tel Aviv. As long as this lingers, there's no real threat to Israel. End quote. Jody Ruderman, it was, I must have had an amateur editor on duty because he got into the New York Times. Okay? Look at it, September 2nd, 2013.
Where does Putin fit in?
I'm going to talk about Putin in just a second. Putin, of course, pulled Obama's chestnuts out of the fire. Okay. Now, he, luckily, he had been carrying on this dialogue with Obama, okay? They all know that Kerry's a neocon. He doesn't admit to be a neocon, but he's a, card-carrying neocon, okay? And so he's pushing this line that now I told you 35 times, we got to go after Assad, Well, when Putin and Obama met in Belfast, in Ireland for a summit in June, I think it was, they said, let's get working on this thing. Putin said, I think I'd get my Syrian friends to destroy all their chemical weapons. And Obama said, what? Yeah, let me work on it, okay? So while Kerry is beating the drums, Putin says, look, we got him to agree. And pulls, and as Kerry is coming out of London, having said at a press conference on the 6th of September, in answer to a question, is there nothing Assad can do to prevent an attack? And he said, and this is a quote, well, we could agree to give up all those chemical weapons, but he's not going to do that. That's not going to happen. That's exactly it. You look at him. Okay, now, he's on the plane going home, and Obama calls him, hey, John, I should have told you this. Well, we worked on this deal, and I want to see you, and then I want you to go back to Geneva and finish this deal. And Kerry's, oh, gosh, okay. Okay, so Kerry does finish the deal. How many Americans know that all the Syrian chemical weapons were destroyed on U.S. warships outfitted for such destruction? Not many, but that's the reality. Now, the neocons? Man, I had a personal experience I'll tell you about. CNN made a big mistake in asking me to, it was their international thing, to ask me to talk about this. So I'm in there, this little booth, about 10 minutes, and it felt really good. So I come out, push the thing, and I knock over this little guy. And it turns out to be Paul Wolfowitz. Wow. This really fancy building, see? So, no, didn't say I'm sorry. So, and who's over there but Joe Lieberman? Right? Now, I want to tell you, have you been at funerals and wakes? This was not an Irish wake. I don't know what Jewish wakes look like, but it looked like a tractor trailer had run over both of their mothers the previous day. They were so down in the mouth. They didn't get their war, okay? They were really angry. And then I got to watch them. They went on after I did, so I was watching the thing. And Lieberman said, I don't know why the president decided that he doesn't have the authority to launch war in Syria. Certainly has the authority. So I dragged out my, if I have it here. Yeah, I dragged out my Constitution. And I look at Article 1, and I underline the part where it says, only Congress has, and I pull it out, thing. And I intercept them at the big, fancy elevator shaft. Right? Now, if you know Washington, you know that you can never admit not to recognizing somebody you should know. And I had a fancy suit. I don't usually have, but I had a suit on. So as I came out of their little room, I said, Paul! Paul! And they look, and this is what happens. They look at you and say, Ray McGovern! Oh, great! Good to see you again. I said, Paul, I couldn't believe what you said about the Constitution. So I happen to have one here. I'd like to take this home. Would you please read it? 30 years in the Senate? You don't know what oh, well, then Wolfowitz is slinking by, and then the beautiful 6-foot model comes, the minder, who is commissioned to prevent muckety-mucks, as my grandmother would call them, from being approached by the likes of me. And she looks on and says, oh, I'm so sorry. And I looked at her and said, yeah, I'm sorry too. Where do you have these clowns come on at this? So my only regret about that is that I think Wolfowitz probably made a big stink and she may have lost her job. But that was a big digression. But I have to tell you that it was an amazing experience of these guys just really doing terrible about. What else? Well, not only did we have Jody Ruderin admitting what the real story was, but Michael Oren, the ambassador, he said publicly, right after all this went down, what did he say? He was a close advisor to Netanyahu as well as ambassador, quote, "The greatest danger to Israel is the strategic arc." Now, this is not Noah's Ark or anything like that. You know what the strategic arc is? Where does it go from Iran to all the way around to Syria, right? Okay. Now, or Syria, Damascus, Beirut. And we saw the Assad regime as the keystone in that arc. We always wanted Bashar al-Assad to go. We always preferred bad guys who weren't backed by Iran to bad guys who were backed by Iran. And so even if the bad guys were affiliated with Al-Qaeda, that's okay with us. Wow. Later, later, a year later, when he was no longer ambassador, he said this, quote, this is June 2014. From Israel's perspective, if there's got to be an evil that's got to prevail, let the Sunni evil prevail. End quote. So what's the bottom line here? Well, you have an unholy alliance between Israel and Saudi Arabia. Who would have foreseen that just a couple of years ago? An unholy alliance. They're in bed with each other, and their primary objective, together with the West, as Wayne had said, which is so clear in that DIA cable. Who's the West? Us, right? And all those clowns there in the Gulf, okay? And what they're trying to do is force Bashar al-Assad out of power and and embarrass Iran in the process because, you know, after all, you know that there's a mutual defense treaty between Iran and Syria. Let me clean up here. Yeah, I have one little subhead I put on one of these articles. It was Corker Uncorked. Now, who am I talking about? Bob Corker, right. Who is he now? Has he got any role to play? He's head of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, right? So what did he say? He said, you know, this is the worst moment in U.S. foreign policy since I've been here. That is Obama's failure to open war on Syria. We're all set to go, and what happened was, and I hate to say it, says Korka, in essence, we jumped into Putin's lap. Whoa! Okay. So Putin prevented a war. We jumped into his lap. Now, the last thing I'll say here about this is you asked about Putin before. Well, he did help Obama. He did help avoid a war. Who did he anger? The neocons. How did they get back at him? Well, Putin's distracted by Sochi, Ukraine. And that is not the 100% reason for Ukraine, but it's a large, large part of why the neocons hate Putin and have demonized him to the extent they have. Last thing here, and I'll just say that when, who was it? I guess when you said that John McCain was the only guy that thought that there were moderates, there was in the Free Syrian Army. Well, actually, also John Kerry thought that, or pretended to think that, right after all this went down. He testified to Congress on the 3rd of September, okay? And he said, it was those Syrians under Bashar al-Assad that did this chemical attack, and besides, the Free Syrian Army is gaining strength. And even the State Department takes with them, going like this, you know. There wasn't a person who was aware of this kind of problem in the world that thought that he was right about that. As a matter of fact, when you talk about how U.S. credulity has suffered from all this, I watched Russian policy for more than a half century, okay? I have never seen a Russian first secretary or a Russian president call any high official in the United States a liar. But as Obama arrived in St. Petersburg, for a summit. The day after Kerry told these lies at Congress, he said publicly, as Obama's getting off the plane, he said, "On vriot, on znaje što vriot, это печально." He says he's lying. He knows that he's lying. This is really sad. Okay. Now, to Putin's credit, he's willing to engage. He's willing to talk to Kerry still for 6 hours, for God's sake. Maybe he's made some sort of dent in it. But this is very dangerous stuff. And I think, hopefully, Kerry and the others will realize that they have an ally in Russia. The Russians don't want Chechnya to blow up again. The Russians don't want ISIS to be ruling that part of the world. So there's some glimmers of hope here. But it's going to take all of us to spread this truth around. And it's going to take all of us to say, at the core of our policy toward this part of the world is Israel. And it would be very different if Israel weren't the cornerstone for policy. And the sooner we recognize that, the more freedom we will have, and the less stupid things we'll do. Thank you very much.
Fighters, fanatics, to Turkey and into Syria. The incident itself, of course, was set up as a, I call it an October surprise in the era of early voting. So if you want to have a good October surprise, you got to have it in September now, right? So that's what they did. And that was to oust Obama and elect Romney. That was the purpose of it. Don't be fooled. The CIA stand down, well, there was a CIA stand down. Well, who could have ordered a CIA stand down? How about the head of the CIA, Petraeus? We'll see him in just a minute. General Petraeus is the prime suspect. And then there's Carter Ham, the head of the U.S. African Command. And there's this question, right? How fast could you get fighter planes into Tripoli or Benghazi, Libya, right? And they said, oh, you have to start in Aviano, right? It's way up at the top of the Adriatic. It takes many, many hours. Yeah, wait a minute. The base is Sigonella on Sicily. It's about an hour and a half away, and it's a famous base. So who are they kidding? Our demand was to essentially grill Petraeus, and once you grill Petraeus, you can grill Ham. So grill the Ham was our demand. Now, the theoretical basis of all of this, what it is. This is a well-established Anglo-American tradition of irregular warfare. Frank Kitson, Brigadier General Frank Kitson of the British forces, started off in Kenya in the 1950s fighting the Mau Mau. And what did he do? He created his own Mau Mau. They killed real Mau Mau and also committed atrocities against the population. You've got to be ready to do the dirty stuff, right? So that's it. Gangs and counter gangs. That's what ISIS is. ISIS is a counter gang. And it was produced in a complex process of gang, counter gang, right? This Zarqawi, he declares loyalty to bin Laden and on and on. And then the stuff we have today, Nusra and ISIS, these are all gangs and counter gangs. They're really not different. Right? Free Syrian Army, same story. So here it is, against the Mau Mau in Kenya. It has been used around the world now for decades and is an integral part of the U.S. counterinsurgency doctrine as composed by Petraeus. Another book, Low Intensity Operation. In other words, it's not all-out war, right? It's not thermonuclear war, it's not heavy divisions, it's this kind of quasi-guerrilla warfare, lightweight warfare. Now, the overwhelming key figure in this is General Petraeus. Extremely dangerous figure, the one who has always seemed to me to embody the threat of dictatorship.
City University brought him to teach here, too.
Yes, and I compliment the students of City University. I think that was a wonderful thing that they were able to expose him and attack him and convince him that he wasn't. There are things going on behind the scenes which sometimes it's not always possible to account for totally. But the fact that he was indicted for sharing his secrets with his paramour there, that Paula Broadwell, this seemed to reflect some agency behind the scenes that didn't want him to become dictator, because he was trying to play that card, right? If it had been Romney as president, might have been Petraeus as vice president, or Secretary of State, or Secretary of Defense, or something like that. Fortunately, he's been set back. He's in disgrace. But watch out, he's not done. He's not done. He's coming for you. Okay? So together with Negroponte, Petraeus directed this Kitsonian shift in the Iraq War, 2004-2005. He's a Bonapartist, and he's got unlimited money. He is backed by the Wall Street creditor Henry Kravis of Kohlberg, Kravis, Roberts, right? The ones who did the junk bond assisted leverage buyouts of RJR Nabisco and all the rest of it. And he's been hit twice. Once by the scandal right after the November 2012 election, and then indicted. The problem is he needed to go to jail. He did not go to jail, so that's another reason why he's still out there and still dangerous. Now, this is the one you may not know about, who is even more dangerous right now. Petraeus is on the outside. Petraeus is, again, in disgrace. This is General John Allen. He is the ISIS czar. He's a State Department official. He was appointed by Kerry in 2014, last year, in fact, give or take. So what's his job? He is the U.S. official envoy to all the countries that are part of this coalition against ISIS, and it's a large group. But it comes down to the fact that the countries he is representing as a lawyer, he's an ambassador to Washington for Turkey, Saudi Arabia, and Qatar. That's your axis of evil. Those are the pro-terrorist countries. Those are the backers of the Muslim Brotherhood. And we'll try to show you how. So what he does is he comes back from a trip to the Middle East and he says, Obama, the Turks want to bomb Assad. What's your answer? Or the Turks want a no-fly zone in northern Syria. What are you going to do, Obama? It ought to be obvious from this that Obama, although a tragic, colossal failure for the United States, Obama is not the worst game in town. Obama is the lesser evil. We have people much worse than Obama. Petraeus, this guy, Allen, McCain, we'll see him. They're all much worse than Obama. So don't waste your time attacking Obama. Attack the biggest warmonger in sight. Figure out who's the biggest warmonger this week. Attack that person. That's the way to do it. For many weeks, it's Allen. So he transmits the demands. He's a bigger warmonger than Obama. He's pushing right now this Turkish demand for a no-fly zone. And remember, a no-fly zone means a comprehensive bombing and air campaign over all of Syria. Russians will be killed. You bomb that Tartus port, I've seen it. You're going to kill some Russians, and then big trouble, right? It's not worth it. Out of all proportion. He wants this terrorist sanctuary. In other words, the no-fly zone would be a terrorist sanctuary carved out of northern Syria and protected by NATO Air Force, right? And in the meantime, Turkey says, you can't use that Incirlik air base. The Turks are playing a dirty, dirty game. And I'm sorry, I'm a friend of Turkey, but not at this rate. So you're dealing with this inside-outside team, Petraeus outside and Allen inside. Now, let's have some fun facts about these people. Well, Senator McCain, walnuts, right? Mentally unstable, son of an admiral, you don't have him. This character operates as Muaz Mustafa. He operates in Washington, D.C. He used to work, I think he was on the staff of Blanche Lincoln of Arkansas. Anyway, he's a Beltway bandit, I guess. And here's McCain. And if you look at that guy back there, that's the killer.
What's McCain's lapel pin?
Huh?
What's McCain's lapel pin?
I like Ike? I don't know. Somebody backwards. But look, the point is the caliph. This is him. This is al-Baghdadi. Now you say he doesn't exist. Well, you know, at the end, Obama was a kind of actor's. Bin Laden. Bin Laden was an actor's studio. they had unemployed actors who would come in and read the statements or, you know, do the acting, doubles, right? Doppelganger. So in this case, there's this guy here. That's the caliph. Now, you got these other guys. Let's try to sum them up. A cannibal, a kidnapper, and a caliph. Arrest McCain for ISIS. This was the Wall Street, Tax Wall Street Party propaganda line for the sort of September, October, November period of last year. So here's a, I'm not sure who that is, and maybe somebody knows, right? But he was out there militating. So a cannibal, a kidnapper, and a caliph. Those are the people that McCain sat down with. And there's the caliph. This doesn't show the Rolex, right? Everybody's impressed by his Oyster watch. But he's got that haughty look of the caliph. Now, here we see the meeting. There's the caliph, and he's talking to McCain. Sorry, there's no way around this. Senator McCain met the caliph. Now, at this point, he was not the caliph. He was the head of Al-Qaeda in Syria. So little do these gang, counter-gang distinctions matter. You can be transferred from the gang to the counter-gang and, you know, several times a day. But he, at this point, was he was on a wanted list of the U.S. authorities. And we have other people in this room. Now, I'm not, I don't know if I can show you everybody exactly. But look, here's a version. Part of this is from CNN, but not all of it, needless to say. There's the caliph. There's the caliph again. The caliph. The caliph. Now, whoever that guy is, right, whether he's an unemployed actor from Beirut, I don't know. But that's the caliph. Right? That's somebody who's playing the role of the caliph this week, this month. In the same room were others. Here's one of them. McCain stopped by for lunch. This is the guy, this is the cannibal. This is the one who has a dead Syrian soldier, they say, cuts him open, pulls out heart and lung, and chows down here on TV. That's one of them. And then there was the question of the kidnappers, right? McCain was threatened with lawsuits by the relatives of 11 Lebanese Shiite pilgrims, Shiites, right, who were kidnapped and held for ransom by ISIS. Now we finally have the terrible, tragic, deplorable cases of the Western, often U.S., not always journalists, who were murdered with these spectacular beheadings or whatever they are, right? Because not always is the entire thing depicted.